Okay, Peter. So we brought you back because we want to talk about one of our least favorite topics, but it's an important one. It's is reference checking, and that's something that anybody raises their hand up in the air and says, "Oh boy, can I do the reference checks?"
Absolutely.
It's difficult, and I think for a couple of reasons. One is because people are worried about data privacy. Two is because they don't want to get sued or liable or interfering with getting a new job. And so I think there's a space and a place for the reference check, and in my view, it should happen after the interview. So and the purpose of it is to verify what the candidate has told you or provided. So it's a verification process, as it says. It's a reference check.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, in today's world, we got to make sure that when candidates come in, they sign a release so that they have given you permission, or given me or whoever permission to go to that university or go to that employer or go to that referee, and that you are okay with that, because otherwise they're just not going to give you any information.
Yeah. You
won't get any transcripts. You won't get anything. So anyway, that's what we want to talk about. It's a topic, as I say, that as you and I were talking a little bit about, is it a good predictor of success? And the answer is it is a predictor, but it's not a huge one. But it's one of those things that you don't want to wind up as an article in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes magazine about the fact that you totally missed the fact that this person who said they had these degrees and had this experience didn't do it. And obviously the most famous case going on right now is we have a congressman in the United States who's said he worked for Goldman Sachs and he graduated from Yale, and none of these things are true.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to avoid that. As a matter of fact, most companies, by the way, because I always did this when any company I was in, we put on the bottom of the application, if any of this information that you have provided is found to be untrue or not factual, it will be cause for immediate dismissal.
Yeah.
And in unambiguous terms, just lay it out. So I don't know why we don't do that with congressmen in the United States, but I think any company that doesn't do that should strongly consider doing that. At any rate, so let's get in and now as a search company, I sometimes hear people say, we don't do reference checks because it's the job of the search company to do the reference check. I'm not sure that that's always clearly identified in the brief.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Well, no, thank you for bringing me back here. It's a hot potato, this one. That's sort of tough conversation to talk about. I was definitely sort of a little bit on the fence with this topic.
Right.
As you just alluded to, whose responsibility is it? Most of the time, most of the firms I've worked with over the last 20 years, it's not in the service level agreement to do.
Right.
We try our best not to do it, I'd say.
Right.
Obviously, if it's at the more premium end of the market, and then it's part of the process.
Okay.
But at a sort of mid to junior type level, or even some senior levels, not it's the responsibility of the HR. And however they do, we have got a case yesterday actually where a client saying, can you do 2 references for us? So it's not in the agreement. We've not signed to do these sort of things, but it's like, we want you to do them. And so I would prefer to say, well, sorry, it's not, we didn't sign up for this.
Right.
But then the question is, okay, we can do it. But okay, what is it you're looking to get out of this reference?
Right.
Because as you just said at the beginning, if you're trying to do it from trying to predict somebody can do the job or not, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Yes, it's got some predictability, but not in comparison to doing interviewing or IQ testing or whatever, integrity testing.
Right.
So if you're using it for the purposes of verification, have they got a criminal record? Have they got the degree that they said they've got? Are you verifying that they were in this company during a certain amount of time? I think, and did that particular job. I think there's definitely merit in that for sure. Yeah. But then, I think it's like this: who is the referee? So who is giving you the information is a big thing, and secondly, who is taking the information? It becomes a very basic information gathering, or on the extreme of it, it becomes almost like another sort of assessment. I've worked in places where it's you're sitting talking to a senior figure, maybe the former boss or something, and you're asking like lots of information about the reporting lines, the responsibilities, how did you rank that person, how did you rate that person? That's a bit that could be dangerous in some way.
They don't necessarily want to give you that information. What we've found is and so the word reference check is very broad, right? We say that it should be a reference verification.
I like that sound. It sounds
it's a semantics, but what you're doing, and so it follows the interview, right? It happens after the interview, and you'd say, okay, Peter said that he worked for you from here to here, and this was his job title. And people are willing to generally say yes or no to those things, right? Or clarify it. Say, well, actually, he worked for us from here to here, but then he was promoted in August of that year. So they will provide some degree of clarity. And that's helpful because at that point in time, you're verifying that this person, the things that they told you in the interview are in fact generally true.
Yeah.
And that's really the intent of the reference check. It's not, the intent of the reference check should not be to say, so tell me about Peter. Is he a good person? Is he really smart? Is he clever? People like him? Is he effective? Those are questions that nobody wants to answer.
Yeah. I think that's why it's an important topic to bring up, because I don't think there's maybe a real understanding of what the correct process is. And I think I actually like the phrase that you're saying there, sort of an employee verification check versus a reference check. It gives a bit more clarity to the purpose of the task. Because as you said, unfortunately, it all too often, I think it is a situation where you start probing for more information. Is there anything else that you can share? And then of course, it's at the end of the day, it's somebody's opinion, isn't it? It's like,
it is.
At the end of the day, it doesn't mean it's factual. You should never be making a decision to hire or not hire, in my opinion, on that. It's another tool to explore further if there's something highlighted, maybe that's wasn't highlighted in the prior interviews or something. But tricky.
The other thing is, as I alluded to before, I think a lot of organizations, and certainly if they're going to put you in that situation, someone needs to secure from the candidate that they've signed a release. Because if you go out and try to collect data without a release, no one's going to give you the information. Universities will not send you a transcript or a verification of degree or anything until they get something with the subject's signature on it. Right? So you mentioned that if it's at the top level recruitment that you guys do that, do you build that in? Is that something that clients expect, or is it something that happens 50% of the time or 20% of the time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there isn't a standard process. I think it depends on the company that you deal with. It's definitely different with obviously the more senior candidates, because like if you look at maybe grads or entry level or even mid level, they come to a recruitment company looking to get a new job or something. Maybe they applied for a job. They're quite happy to give you their ID card and their education certificates and all that sort of information. But if you're talking about a C-level executive, you don't get that type of insights. They're not going to be willingly sharing that information off straight away. And secondly, they might not even be interested in looking for a new job. And so that's again the difference between maybe active candidates and passive candidates, and that can cause the process to be inconsistent maybe. But I think for senior C-level roles, there generally is some form of reference check. But I think it's a bit of a it's not verification. It's let's get that person's opinion on this person's ability to do the job. And that's
that's a dicey way to do it. I agree. I mean, you know, I would hate to have the the lost opportunity to get a job because someone didn't like me.
yeah,
You know, and that happens.
yeah. Well, as you said,
Not with me, of course.
but as you said, like in Thailand, it's often people don't want to harm. You know, they've worked together.
Exactly.
They've got to, you know, we're generally decent people, and we want people to be
Right.
to do well and be happy. And so you don't really want to put a former colleague or former subordinate in without a chance of getting a new job and stuff. So sometimes that means that the answers you get are pretty, you know, vanilla.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's like in the you know, in the US or Europe per se. I mean, I
It's
think,
typical.
it's a little bit probably. I'm not sure how.
A lot of it's related to, you know, to data privacy. People, you know, it's kind of drilled at the legal departments and the companies say, don't say anything about anybody.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And so that's kind of the edict that comes down. But as I say, I've found that if you have the applicant sign a release and you can send that ahead and then say, you know, the only purpose we have in this is to verify things that the candidate told us in the interview.
Yeah.
So we just need a yes or a no on those things. And it's not a matter of we're asking you your opinion or was he likable, was, you know, effective, all those things.
yeah. I think that's definitely the right way to go. But I think also that usually happens, right? Clients, you will ask a candidate to provide, you know, maybe a former boss, a former colleague, a former sort of
Their aunt and uncle.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're best friends, basically. So, but the other interesting point is when should the reference verification take place? As you said, it should be at the end.
Right.
And I agree, I think. But also, there's companies who want to do that during the process as well. There's companies that go, look, with, you know, we've got two candidates. We're not sure which we like them both. For example, let's get some reference checks on both of them. Sometimes confidentially as well, actually, which is another sensitive part of the process. But
if you, I don't know this, and so I'm fishing here. Are there any firms out there that you work with that can do background checks, or
there are companies that do that sort of thing.
You ever get requested to use those firms? Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Generally, there's been one occasion with a large American PLC where they wanted us to do due diligence on a potential CEO coming into the business.
Okay.
On which we hired a private investigator to do 2 weeks surveillance.
Wow.
And obviously he produced then a huge report of this person's whereabouts and also his financial details and all that sort of stuff. And he was completely clean.
Right.
Of course, the investigator wanted to find something because he wants to know, he wants to make you think he's done his job.
Right.
Of course, he couldn't find anything. So obviously the candidate got the job and did well.
Yeah. I mean, there are people, particularly if you've got somebody who's in a fiduciary responsibility, like being the chairman of the board or whatever else, people are going to want to know what potential conflicts of interest they may have.
Yeah.
Do they have any related companies, or are they on a board of another company, or things like that?
Yes.
That's totally understandable. And I think candidates for that position understand that. I mean, I've been through that with people too. Say, look, we're going to have to do a background check on your shareholdings,
sure,
whatnot. And so,
or finance directors, you know, with credit checks and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
If you're going to manage a company's finances,
yes,
let's make sure that your finances are in check as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want somebody out there $3 million a knock and they come in and cook the books. Okay. In terms of so there's a difference in the service level, obviously, between the lower end candidates and the higher end candidates. Can you talk just a little bit about what you do? I mean, the range of clients that you are willing to handle, because I think sometimes people think of search firms as all encompassing, right? And they just, oh yeah, I need to hire a secretary, and can you do that for me? Or I need a CEO. Can you do that? So talk to me a little bit about how you kind of separate out or communicate to clients what you do and what you don't do?
Well, our company is a very specific company in terms that we work in a very specific niche, which is basically the product value chain. So
Right.
basically, any companies who have a product that goes from end to end, from conception through to the manufacturing and distribution of the product. So that's big consumer companies,
Right.
and large industrial companies that have a product. So we would be essentially recruiting all the mid to senior talent, and so yes, so C-level, but also the functional leaders. And so, yeah, not so much on the entry level type stuff and grad type stuff, which would again, going back to the linking it to references and stuff. It's most of the clients that we work with. It's a bit sporadic in terms of whether they want a reference check or something. I think it's more, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent in mid level, like
Right.
so let's say sales manager or finance manager or supply chain manager. But the further you go up, maybe at director level becomes a little bit more, can you do it for us? But it's not usually in service level agreements, like I'd say.
Right. Right. Okay.
And I think if it depends on, like, different recruitment companies have different service offerings and obviously different pricings and things like that. And so obviously you've got to price that into the contract as well, right? Because obviously you're searching for the talent, but then to do reference checks can often take quite a considerable amount of time as well.
Sure.
So does the client want to pay us to do the reference checks?
Right.
Or do they want it as a freebie?
Freebie, obviously.
So that sort of happens. So, like I said,
You're
there
asking
are
me, do I
companies
want
that
to
do
pay
it.
for this or do I not pay for it? I would say not pay for it.
Yeah. So, yeah, it depends. But there are. I've worked for a company where we also had a reference check service.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so, I don't know. I forget exactly how many, but maybe 400 or 500 reference checks a month or something.
Oh,
for like a bank or a telecom company. So it'd be more like the entry level type stuff. Verifications of ID and education.
okay.
It's that type of reference verification versus I've got a senior level candidate. I'm going to get. I want to get.
I want to know if they own stock or
Yeah,
competing companies or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I know I used to do when we hired salespeople is we wanted to get a police report on their driving record.
Yeah.
Because we were going to give them a company car.
Yeah.
And we didn't want them to have an accident and kill people. And we find out that they've been involved in 6 fatal accidents before this one.
Yeah.
So, there are certain jobs that have certain kinds of things that you'd want to check, salespeople or truck drivers or whatever else. But certainly people who are in finance or handling the cash, you might want a police report or something like that.
Like you said, it's the difference between a verification check and a check to see if the candidate's good or not. This is the misunderstanding, maybe, right? It's like the verification check, yes, but if it's a salesperson you're recruiting and you want to get a reference check or a verification, you want to, rightly or wrongly, people want to know, can this guy sell or not? Is he good?
Okay.
And that's the sort of the dangerous side of reference check, because it becomes subjective and becomes. Well,
one of the topics I'm gonna be talking to my partner Dr. Fan about is these elements that you add to the selection process. For instance, years ago when I was hiring salespeople, I would ask them to I would hand them a pen and say, "Okay, give me in 5 minutes. Sell me this pen."
Yeah.
Okay. And it wasn't very scholarly or well thought out. And eventually, we got to a point where we kind of refined it a little bit and gave them one A4 piece of paper with some description of products and whatnot on it. Said, "Read this and then make a presentation to me." What you're looking for basically is, does the person have the ability to ask questions to find out what I need and want, or are they just going to launch into the fact that here are all the features and benefits and hope to God that I say something that you're interested in?
Yeah.
So I think there are, and for instance, for finance and accounting people, there are things where you can have them read an Excel spreadsheet, a balance sheet, and tell you something about the company. So you're verifying that. And then there's a Microsoft has a whole suite of kind of competency gate tests for Word and DBase and Excel and whatnot, PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So you can kind of check the level of competence that the individual has before you hire them. Now, you're not going to give those tests to somebody who's going to be a vice president, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily expect that they have to know how to do all of those things.
Yeah, or they might not want to play ball in doing it in the first place.
Right.
I'm an executive, I'm busy.
Right.
You need me more than I need you. So it's difficult. But I think, slightly off topic, but like work sample tests are obviously a very strong predictor of success, aren't they? But I very rarely hear about that. I suppose I've started to hear sort of like business case studies at final interview stage or something like that.
Right. I used to write those things because years ago we used to do assessment centers. So the work sample tests and the simulations are basically short exercises out of assessment centers, is what they are.
Right.
And then the interviewer plays the role of the observer. So you give somebody a case, you have them read it, and then they say, I reviewed this case, and here's what I found out. This is my analysis. And then you ask them questions. That is very useful. Those things have kind of a double-edged sword. And by that, I mean, years ago when we had people using those for business analysts and for planners and a couple other key positions where they had to do problem-solving type thing, the director would come in during the candidate review session, and the only question they would ask, how did they do in the business case? So they, in other words, the interview had condensed down to this, and they only really wanted to pay attention to that one business case, and they were so they had a bias. The things that should have been important were unimportant because they were just making the decision on one thing. So the worry with business cases is, and you always have to frame this in the right way. Remember, this is a piece of it. It's not the whole thing. It's like a personality test or cognitive ability or work sample or interviews. They all have a role to play. And you and I were talking about the recent update to the Hunter and Schmidt articles about predictability. And what's interesting is that they've read the literature all the way along. We're back to saying that the structured interview is still the most powerful predictor in the selection context. And yet, it's the one area that, as we were talking about earlier, that I think people tend not to take seriously. They have discussions.
Or they're not trained to do it. They don't know how to do it, do they? Yeah.
Right.
But I think also, the intelligence test is still up there, isn't it? But remarkably, at the end of the day,
it is. And I have two worries about the intelligence tests. We obviously we make them and we provide them to clients and whatnot, but usually the cognitive ability tests have three facets. There's a verbal, numerical, and abstract reasoning to it. The biggest challenge when you're using these things internationally is that you've got to translate the verbal reasoning into that local language. And remember, knowing how cognitive abilities tests are scored, it's the number of right answers you get in a period of time. So all cognitive ability tests or IQ tests or graduate record exams are all timed. And the more correct answers you get in the time allotted, the higher your score. It's just that simple.
Yes.
So if when you've translated this from language A into language B, if the person who's reading it doesn't make sense to them, it slows them down and they're not clear on what the intent is, their score goes down. Yeah. So a lot of organizations, ours included, we have eliminated the verbal reasoning, and just gone with the abstract and the numerical reasoning, because those are much more straightforward, not so much language dependent, and you can get almost the same insight. Not quite, but very, very close. So, but again, it's a matter of understanding where these things fit in the process, when they are delivered, and how you evaluate them so that they don't become either too important or unimportant. They all have a role to play.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think they all have a role to play, right? It's not one. You shouldn't make one decision based off one of the criteria. I think just to bring up an example of a client that I've worked with probably about 12 months ago, we had an interview process of six or seven interviews. So finally the candidate got through to it, and you're thinking, okay, this is going well, but they had the final panel interview with 3 or 4 of the same people that they'd already met.
Oh my God!
They had to do a case study. And of course, unfortunately, that didn't go as well.
Right.
After that 3 or 4 month period, of course, it comes down to that 30 minutes case study. They didn't get offered the job.
Right.
So we were then saying, well, look, you must like the candidate to get to this point.
Yeah. To get
everybody's different. Every different stakeholder's been involved, and they like the person. Let's use reference checks.
Right.
To help support this person's case that he or she can do the job. But ultimately, it's the case study was the ultimate defining factor.
Right,
right. Irrespective of all the interviews and the reference checks.
This is where, Peter, I've always said, what is HR's role in this? Well, I've always said the HR people should not be involved in interviewing. They can help get the role profile, the job description. They can work on the compensation. They can even do the screening. But the screening should be tied to whatever the competencies and criteria are you're going to use to evaluate the candidate. Their job is to take 1 or 2 of those things plus the background, education, and salary expectations and check off those things, and then come to you and say, here's what we recommend as a short list. Then you allow the interviewing process to go through. HR has got a role to play in terms of bringing the interviewers together at the end and kind of facilitating the discussion on the candidate.
Yeah.
But they should be the process owners. So they got to constantly remind the hiring manager and their team, look, guys, this simulation counts for 15, 20%. Your interview counts for 40%.
Yeah.
So let's not lose our focus here. Let's get back to the interview and say, what did you learn in there? And then to your point, maybe we go back and say, let's verify the references.
Sure.
So we can verify the experience. Now, there are lots of reasons why they may not have done as well on a work sample test.
Yeah.
It's stage fright, right?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, exactly. It's not exactly. It's a manufactured environment. It's
exactly.
It's not a real situation.
Yeah, you got 30 minutes to solve all these problems. Oh my God.
But I think there's some merit in having, whether it's a HR person or a behavioral psychologist or something. I mean, I was involved in a project a couple of years ago with 2 companies merging, and so they were creating a new board, and so there wasn't selection for a new role. It was sort of the selection for the new C-level positions. And so I was the interviewer from an experience perspective, an external perspective in comparison to the market. Right. And then but there was also a behavioral psychologist in the interview as well, and she was the interviewer based on leadership competency and behaviors and things like that. So it was it was a great experience for me to be involved in. But what I was interviewing was very different. What I was questioning was very different to how she was questioning, and so she's obviously had the professional qualifications to go really deep into various leadership criteria.
Right, that's my field also. But the thing is, when we look at leadership, we always say, let's look at the personality, let's look at the behavioral interview, and let's marry those 2 things together. Personality does not predict behavior. It gives you an indication of how aligned a person is going to be with that kind of behavior, but it doesn't predict it. So, well, listen, Peter, the time has gone very quickly. Thank you very much for your time and insight, and I hope people are taking away all the right information from what we have carefully uncovered for them.
I think it's a great thing you're doing, Tom, and I'm sure it'll be very helpful to the membership and the broader community.
Good. Hope so. Well, thanks again.
Thanks.